Rain had been drilling River North dumpsters for hours, and the sound seeped through the kitchen vent like a slow leak. The Halston Hotel's Chicago kitchen was empty except for me, fluorescent lights buzzing above stainless steel that never felt warm. I kept my shoulders locked and my head down, scrubbing sauté pans stacked too high, each one crusted with black grease that refused to let go. My third pad of steel wool was already thinning. My knuckles were split, the sting sharp, then numb, then sharp again. Keep moving, I told myself. Tonight, the pile felt like a punishment. I was 27, a single mom with a keycard job and a body that lived on coffee and stubbornness. Eli was 6, small for his age, and his asthma made every cold season feel like a cliff edge. He was sleeping across town at my Aunt Marcy's, tucked under a quilt that smelled like laundry soap and comfort I could not afford. I pictured his inhaler on the nightstand, the blue plastic that bought him breath. In my checking account sat $1,143, and rent was due in 6 days. For Eli, I stayed. I could not let life slip. Trent had left the mess on purpose. I did not need proof, I knew his habits the way you know a bruise. He managed nights with a smirk and a clipboard, handing out chores like debts, watching who flinched. When he passed through earlier, he made a point of pausing behind me, breathing too close, letting me feel replaceable. He liked reminding me that applications waited in his office, that I was just another uniform. He added the grill to my list after Javier clocked out, because he could. Anger rose hot, and I swallowed it. Keep moving. For Eli. I turned the faucet off and the silence rushed in, thick enough to hear the rain strike metal outside. My chest tightened the way it used to when bills arrived at my mother's door, when the fridge held nothing but condiments and hope. She had taught me a trick: count backward from 5, open your eyes, deal with what is there. So I did it again, right there by the industrial sink, forehead almost touching cold steel. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and my hands went back to work. I scraped the grill until my arms shook, jaw clenched tight. The thing about being broke is that time turns into a creditor. Every minute has interest. I worked 2 shifts when I could, and still the math never softened. I had a past due clinic bill for Eli from the last flare-up, and an inhaler refill waiting like a deadline I could not negotiate. I thought about the cheap apartment above the laundromat, the hallway that smelled like bleach and damp socks, the lock that stuck in winter. I thought about losing it. My palms slipped on the scraper, sweat mixing with grease. Keep moving, I told myself again. I did not notice him at first. That is what scares me, looking back. Trent always announced himself with footsteps and attitude, but this presence was different, quiet as a held breath. I caught it in the stainless hood's reflection, a shape that had been there longer than a stranger should be. My spine warned me before my eyes did. I kept scraping, pretending my heart was not trying to claw out of my chest. The kitchen door hung open behind him, framing darkness and rain. I told myself he was lost, but my instincts refused. For Eli, always. When I turned, he stood just inside the threshold like the room belonged to him by design. Wet black wool clung to his shoulders, the kind of coat that costs more than a year of my rent, and he did not seem bothered by the rain. His hair was dark, cut precise, and his face was not handsome so much as assembled. The fluorescent light caught his eyes, gray and flat, the color of sidewalks after a storm. He watched me the way you study a problem you already solved. He measured distance, leaving space, and that deliberateness unnerved me. My first thought was police, but my phone was in my locker and my hands were slick with grime. My second thought was Eli waking up and reaching for me in the dark, and that thought nearly broke my knees. I did not lift the scraper as a weapon, I held it because my fingers needed something steady. The stranger did not advance fast. He moved like a man who never rushes because the world rushes for him. The air around him felt expensive and dangerous, like cologne over steel. Somewhere behind me the refrigeration unit clicked, patient and indifferent. I realized then that he had been watching my hands, not my body, as if he cared more about what I could endure than what I looked like. That was worse. Men who want something usually show it. He showed control, and control is a language I learned to fear young. The rain kept tapping the vent above us, counting time like a metronome. I could feel my life narrowing to this doorway, this stranger, this moment. Everything before tonight was survival. Everything after would be something else. I did not know his name, but I knew he chose me. He didn't step fully into the light at first. He let the swinging door settle behind him, and the soft thud sounded too final for a hotel kitchen. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his coat, but he held himself like the weather was a choice he'd made. My hand stayed on the scraper. My brain searched for labels the way it always did when I was scared: drunk guest, security audit, cop, debt collector. None of them fit the stillness in his face. I shifted my weight, making sure I had a clean path to the hallway. My phone was in my locker. The panic tasted metallic, like blood and pennies. I tried to picture Eli asleep under Aunt Marcy's quilt and forced my breath to slow. For Eli. Keep moving. My eyes flicked to the nearest pan, to the sink, to anything I could grab if he came closer. He didn't. He stood about 8 feet away, not crowding me, not pretending to be harmless. He watched like a person who didn't need permission to look. The fluorescent buzz seemed louder. Somewhere in the building, a machine hummed on, steady and uncaring. Then he began laying out my life with the calm precision of someone reading a report he'd memorized. He knew my name. He knew the number in my bank account, $1,143, like it was printed on my forehead. He knew my rent was due in 6 days, and he knew the landlord was about to raise it, which meant I was already losing an apartment I couldn't replace. He knew the clinic I used for Eli's asthma, the refill schedule on his inhaler, the way I stretched a prescription by counting puffs like they were coins. He knew the nights Eli slept upright on my chest when cold air tightened his lungs. He knew I'd skipped the last follow-up because the copay would have wiped out my groceries for the week. Each fact landed like a hand closing around my throat. I felt exposed in a way I'd never felt with Trent's petty cruelty. Trent could humiliate me, but he couldn't see inside my life. This man could. My anger flared hot and immediate, the protective kind that comes when someone mentions your child. I told myself to move toward the door, to make noise, to find a coworker, to call 911 the second I had my phone. But my feet didn't obey, because the fear underneath the anger was colder and smarter. I kept trying to solve him. If he was law enforcement, he would have had a badge and a script. If he was a debt collector, he would have led with threats. If he was a stalker, he would have enjoyed my reaction. He did none of that. His face stayed neutral, almost bored, like he was delivering weather. That made my skin crawl. He finally gave me a name to hold on to: Damian Crowe. 33, he looked like the kind of man who never gets told no without consequences. He didn't announce power with jewelry or volume. He carried it in the way he measured space, in the way the kitchen seemed to rearrange itself around him. I realized he'd thought about where cameras were, where exits were, and where I would run if I tried. That awareness made me want to scream. It also made me think he wasn't here to improvise harm. Men who plan like that don't rely on impulse. And then, without warning, the purpose shifted. He wasn't listing facts to corner me. He was building a case for why my life was about to collapse and why he could prevent it. He offered me an arrangement that sounded like a mistake at first, because it was too clean, too specific, too generous for a world that had never given me anything without taking something back. 6 months. That was the limit. For 6 months, I would appear at his side in public, dinners, charity events, meetings where smiles hid knives. I wouldn't be asked to invent a fake background, just to stop volunteering painful truths to people who would use them. I would be trained, coached, dressed, and taught how to survive rooms that eat women. He promised boundaries so clear they sounded like contracts: no intimacy required, no touching I didn't want, no private demands disguised as favors. He would pay me weekly, enough that I could stop counting puffs and pennies. At the end of the 6 months, regardless of how the arrangement ended, the debts strangling my life would be cleared. The real bait was Eli. He spoke about my son as if his breathing mattered more than my pride. Safe housing, consistent medical care, and a school that wouldn't treat him like an inconvenience were part of the offer, along with a driver and a plan. My suspicion screamed that men like him never do favors. Still, I pictured Eli's cough, and I felt my yes forming. I just couldn't understand why Damian Crowe wanted us in his penthouse starting tonight. I didn't go back to the sink. I rinsed my hands, grabbed my bag, and walked through the Halstons' back halls like I was carrying a glass secret. The air smelled like bleach and fryer oil, but my mind was already somewhere else. I kept thinking, for Eli, keep moving forward. A black SUV waited at the curb, engine purring low. Two men in plain coats watched the street with practiced stillness, and Damian stood near the rear door like the rain didn't touch him. I didn't say goodbye to anyone at work. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady. I crossed town to Aunt Marcy's apartment, hands tight on the steering wheel. Eli was already half asleep, small body curled on the couch with his backpack beside him. I checked his breathing first, then the inhaler in my purse, then his forehead for fever, the way mothers check everything twice. Eli blinked up at me, brave in the quiet way he always was. He didn't ask why we were leaving at this hour, not out loud. He just rubbed his eyes, slipped on his sneakers, and clung to my hand like it was the only map he needed. My guilt hit hard, then tucked itself away. Back outside, the SUV door opened without drama. Eli climbed in first, holding his backpack like armor. I slid in close, fingers resting on his shoulder, listening for any wheeze. The car moved through wet streets, neon bleeding into puddles, while my mind ran escape routes and bedtime routines at the same time. The drive felt too smooth, too silent. Chicago passed in reflections, streetlights, bridges, late-night diners, the river like a dark ribbon. Damian sat across from us, watching without staring, measured and still. I kept telling myself I could leave at any moment, even while the door stayed locked. We entered a private garage under a riverfront tower, concrete spotless, cameras tucked into corners like small black eyes. Doors shut with a soft final click behind us. The elevator rose without music, only the hush of cables, and my ears popped with the altitude like we were leaving my life behind. When the elevator opened, the penthouse revealed itself in one breath. A wall of glass faced the city, and Chicago glittered below like a different universe. Everything inside looked expensive and untouchable, pale stone floors, low furniture, art that felt like a warning instead of comfort. My shoes sounded too loud. It smelled of clean linen and faint cedar, not cooking oil. I realized how used I was to the scent of work clinging to me. A guard stood near the corridor, silent as a statue, and another presence lingered farther back, just out of view. Luxury, I understood, could be a perimeter built to keep threats out. Ms. Lorraine met us with a calm that didn't ask permission. Her hair was silver and neat, her hands steady, her movements practical. Without fuss, she guided Eli toward a small corner that had been softened on purpose, where a child-sized blanket waited beside crackers, apple slices, and a toy dinosaur still boxed. Eli's eyes widened, sleepiness fighting curiosity. He hugged the dinosaur to his chest, then looked at me for approval. I nodded, pretending my heart wasn't cracking. I checked his inhaler again, counted doses by habit, and hated how safe this felt already, because safety usually came with a price. Damian didn't hover, but his presence threaded through the space like gravity. He indicated a guest suite for me and a smaller room set up for Eli, with nightlights and fresh pajamas in his size. No one asked my preferences. The plan had been decided before I arrived tonight, apparently. After a quick shower, I tucked Eli into the new bed. He fell asleep fast, the kind of sleep a child only takes when his lungs feel clear. I stood at the window watching cars crawl like fireflies. I should have felt rescued. Instead I felt managed, filed, secured away. Ms. Lorraine returned with a slim box and paperwork I hadn't asked for. Inside was a new phone already charged, linked to a private network, and a card with emergency numbers I didn't recognize. My old phone disappeared into a sealed pouch, as if my past could be switched off. The new screen showed an account I'd never opened, already funded with my first weekly pay. Another note listed automatic bill handling, including my rent for the month. My job at the Halston was recorded as resigned due to a family emergency. It was efficient. It was terrifying for me. There was even a solution for my landlord problem, a promise that any notice would be rerouted and handled. Aunt Marcy received a text explaining I'd taken a caregiving assignment out of town, limited contact. I pictured her face and felt sick. They had written my alibi without asking first. I sat on the edge of the couch, new phone heavy in my palm, and listened to the building breathe. Eli slept down the hall, dinosaur on his pillow, and my chest loosened with relief. Then it tightened again. A cage can be velvet. A cage can be a cage. Damian moved through his home like a man carrying a storm inside. He didn't threaten me, he organized me. Doors locked behind us with quiet authority. Cameras were discreet, but I felt them. A perimeter existed around my son now, and that should have comforted me. Instead, it warned me. Before he disappeared into the far side of the penthouse, Ms. Lorraine left a folder on the counter, tomorrow's schedule, a fitting, and a name I hadn't met yet, Celeste Ward. It smelled like perfume and paperwork. I understood the next step wasn't rest. It was preparation for public rooms. I stared at that folder until the words blurred. I'd wanted a way out, and I'd been given an elevator up instead. Somewhere below, my old life kept turning without me, already rewritten. I kissed Eli's forehead and made a promise: learn fast, stay sharp, and never forget my exit. At 6:30 in the morning, the penthouse woke before I did. A light strip along the hallway floor faded up like a runway, and the coffee machine started humming on a timer I didn't set. My new phone buzzed with a schedule that looked like it belonged to someone richer and braver than me: breakfast, fitting, coaching, lunch, security briefing. Even the pauses had names. I stared at it for a long second, then tucked it into my pocket and went to check on Eli. He was curled on his side, dinosaur tucked under his arm, breathing quiet. I watched his chest rise and fall the way other people watch stock prices. I counted in my head, not because I thought something was wrong, but because I needed to feel useful. When he stirred, I guided him through the morning inhaler routine, slow and steady, making it feel normal. Then I kissed his forehead and told myself the same thing again: this isn't vanity, this is defense. Celeste Ward arrived like a storm contained in a blazer. She didn't raise her voice, but she filled the room with expectation. She looked me over the way a tailor looks at a bolt of fabric, already seeing what needs cutting. Ms. Lorraine handed her a folder with my sizes, my background, my weak spots, and I hated how fast my life could become bullet points. Celeste led me to a mirrored room with a rack of clothes and a stool that felt like a courtroom seat. The first lesson was physical. Fabric changes you. A structured jacket made my shoulders sit back even when my nerves wanted to fold in. A pair of heels forced me to place my feet like decisions, not apologies. Celeste adjusted everything with quick hands, then made me walk again, slower, smoother, chin level. I saw myself in the mirror and almost laughed. I looked expensive. Inside, I still felt like a woman who scrubs pans at 1 in the morning. The contrast burned. She taught me how not to flinch. Eye contact, steady but not desperate. A soft smile that didn't invite questions. Hands relaxed, not clutching at my own body for safety. Breathing that moved low in the ribs, so my voice wouldn't shake. When she fed me the kinds of questions people like the Harringtons ask, I practiced answering without giving them my pain. I learned to offer facts that couldn't be weaponized, then redirect with something bland and polite. The most powerful move, Celeste made clear, was silence. If I didn't rush to fill it, other people would, and they would reveal themselves. Halfway through, Eli needed me. I heard the small cough from down the hall and my training snapped like a rubber band. I found him sitting on the bed, cheeks flushed, eyes shiny with fear he tried to hide. I checked his inhaler, listened to his breathing, and held him close until his body loosened. My heart punched against my ribs. I was dressing for war while my child fought for air. That anger didn't make me reckless. It made me focused. I went back to the mirror with the taste of metal in my mouth and the promise of my son in my spine. Damian's rules came next, delivered through routine, not speeches. I learned the exits in every room I entered, even this one. I learned where cameras sat, where blind spots lived, and how to stand so I wasn't boxed in. I learned that drinks were traps when I didn't watch them poured, and that a pretty glass could be a weapon. I learned that my phone was secure because every call could be listened to by someone who wanted leverage. Safety, in Damian's world, wasn't a feeling you earned. It was a system you maintained, like locking a door twice and checking the window even when the night seems calm. By late afternoon, my feet ached and my jaw hurt from holding my face in neutral lines. Celeste had drilled me until my body understood what my mind still resisted. I realized I had been training for this my whole life without knowing it. Years of being invisible in kitchens and hallways had taught me to read moods, track movement, notice who carried power and who carried resentment. I had survived by observing. Now I would survive by doing it in better clothes. Damian watched some of it from a distance, not interfering, but the presence of his attention made my skin prickle. He didn't compliment. He simply corrected the environment around me, turning lights, moving a chair, clearing a path to the door, as if he was teaching my body to remember escape. I hated needing that. I hated loving it more than anything. Before Celeste left, she placed a final fact in the air like a countdown. In 48 hours, Damian and I would sit at a Harrington table, under chandeliers and old money smiles. The dinner wasn't social. It was a test, designed to see if I cracked, if Damian hesitated, if Eli became the shadow behind my eyes. I stood in the mirror, expensive jacket on my shoulders, fear in my throat, and I understood the truth. I wasn't learning to fit in. I was learning to walk into a room that wanted to eat me and leave with my dignity intact. By the time we reached the Harrington estate, the rain had eased into mist, and the streetlights made the wet pavement shine like black glass. Iron gates opened without hesitation. The mansion sat in the Gold Coast like it had always been there, warm and untouched by the rest of Chicago. I stepped from the SUV in a dress Celeste chose, feeling the fabric pull my shoulders back. The air smelled of roses and money. I reminded myself that Eli was asleep under a child-sized blanket in Damian's penthouse, breathing easy for once. I had to stay steady, because my steadiness was his safety. Inside, everything glittered in soft light, crystal, polished wood, linen so white it looked unreal. Laughter moved quietly, practiced. People glanced at me with the same quick assessment they gave Damian, only theirs was curiosity and his was consequence. I did what Damian taught me and what service work trained into my bones. I mapped exits. Front hall behind us, terrace doors to the left, a side corridor that led toward kitchens, and a staircase disappearing upward. I noticed where security stood without looking like security, bodies placed at corners like punctuation. Luxury can be a room. It can also be a perimeter. Vivian Harrington approached with a smile that felt like a blade wrapped in velvet. Pearls at her throat, hair perfect, posture that told the room she owned the script. She didn't insult me outright. She offered polite praise that carried traps, steering me toward confession, where I came from, how I managed alone, what kind of father my son had, what schools I'd attended, whether I planned to keep working or let Damian change my life. She treated single motherhood like a charming hardship story, the kind guests enjoy because it isn't theirs. Every question pushed at the same sore spot, trying to make me explain myself until I sounded grateful for being tolerated. I let the silence breathe. Celeste's voice lived in my ribs now, telling me not to sprint toward approval. I answered with clean, useless facts and then stopped. I didn't apologize for my life. I didn't paint Eli as a tragedy. I spoke about him like a person I was proud of, because that was the truth. When Vivian tried to corner me into embarrassment, I redirected to the city, to the evening's charity, to the idea that help only matters when it comes with respect. I watched her eyes for impatience, for the twitch that meant I wasn't giving her the show she wanted. The smallest victory came when a few guests stopped waiting for me to crack and started listening like they'd forgotten I was supposed to be entertainment. Damian never saved me with a speech. He shifted the room with a movement. He stepped closer, not possessive, just present, and the air changed the way it changes when a storm picks a direction. When we were led to the dining room, he chose seating like it was strategy, placing me where I could see the door and where no one could box me in without crossing his sight line. He adjusted my chair with a brief touch, steadying me without making me look fragile. Conversation softened around us. Vivian's smile tightened by a fraction, like she'd been reminded that I wasn't a toy she could pick up and drop. The table looked flawless, silver lined up like soldiers and candlelight caught in water glasses. Courses arrived on perfect timing, but the rhythm felt too perfect, as if someone else was conducting it. A server lingered behind Damian's left shoulder longer than necessary. Another passed him twice with an empty tray, eyes forward, jaw tense. Near the bar, a man checked his phone, then looked up at Damian with something colder than admiration. I told myself I was reading ghosts, but then I saw a real mistake. One server wore a dull gray wristband instead of the event's pale blue. He held his tray steady, yet his fingers trembled, a tiny shake that didn't belong in a house built on performance. That same server returned with a bottle presented as a gift, rare enough that heads turned toward the ritual. Vivian watched me watch it, as if checking whether I understood what was happening. Damian's rule about drinks echoed in my mind: never accept what you didn't watch poured. I focused on the server's hands. When he reached for the glasses, he shifted his grip, and a clear vial flashed against his palm, tucked between his fingers like a secret. He angled his body to block the view, cuff sliding over the gray band. My pulse slammed hard enough to taste metal. In that instant, I understood the dinner wasn't only meant to humiliate me. Vivian's questions were a distraction, designed to keep my eyes on her while someone got close to Damian. And I was the leverage point they assumed would keep him human, soft, predictable. The glass began to slide toward him, smooth as a promise, and every instinct I had screamed that the next few seconds mattered. I couldn't make a scene. I had to move with purpose, the way people survive when no one is allowed to panic. I felt pressure at my back, and I knew if I failed, the fallout would reach Eli. I scanned for Damian's security and the nearest exit. The glass slid toward Damian like it belonged there, candlelight trembling inside it. I felt the room tilt, a predator's smile turning into a hunter's patience. My throat tried to close, but Celeste's training held me upright. I kept my face calm and my eyes busy. The server's cuff shifted, and a clear vial flashed against his palm for a heartbeat. Wrong wristband, wrong hands, wrong timing. My body wanted to shout, to grab, to run. Instead I watched Damian's profile, waiting for his rules to move. In an instant I understood, this wasn't manners, it was control, rehearsed and cold. Damian's gaze shifted, not to me but to the space behind the server. He didn't flinch, the room did. A man near the wall moved first, sliding between Damian and the tray with a polite angle that hid the interruption. Another appeared at my shoulder, guiding me back with a palm hovering, never touching. Chairs scraped softly. Vivian's laugh kept going, but it sounded thinner, like someone forcing music over a siren. Damian rose, and everyone made room without understanding why. We left through a side corridor that smelled faintly of citrus polish and fear. My heartbeat counted seconds, loud. Outside, the night air hit me hard, damp and sharp. The SUV door shut with a soft seal that sounded final. As we pulled away, I watched the mansion lights shrink, then disappear behind trees, like a stage curtain dropping. I cradled my hands together to stop them shaking and pictured Eli asleep, unaware that his mother had almost become a headline. Damian sat across from me, silent, phone in his hand, sending messages I couldn't read. No one asked if I was okay. In this world, okay was a status, not a feeling. I realized I was evidence now. Back at the tower, we skipped the lobby and used the private garage again. Cameras blinked, elevators whispered, and every surface looked too clean to touch. MS. Lorraine met us with the same composed face, but her eyes checked my pupils and my hands, like she could read shock the way nurses do. Eli's room stayed quiet, I didn't wake him. Damian led me into a windowless study paneled in dark wood. The air smelled of leather and cold coffee. He positioned me in a chair and made the room feel like a deposition. His men waited outside, listening too. I replayed the dinner the way I replayed rush hour kitchens, frame by frame. Vivian's soft questions, designed to keep my eyes on her, the guests leaning in like they were watching a sport. The candles burned low, and the servers moved in loops that should have been predictable. One wasn't. The gray wristband stood out against white cuffs. The server's fingers trembled as he reached for the bottle gift, and the vial flashed again, clear glass catching light for a breath. I remembered the angle of his body, blocking the pour from view. I also remembered who nodded at him. The nod came from a man near the bar who never touched his drink. He wore a charcoal suit and held his phone low, thumb moving in short bursts, eyes lifting only when Damian shifted. When he tucked the phone away, a ring on his right hand caught the light, black stone set in silver, carved with a tiny hawk shape. Earlier, a different guest had slipped him an envelope and walked away without greeting anyone. At the table, Vivian watched Damian more than she watched me, as if she expected him to save me loudly. That was bait, too. Damian listened to my replay without interrupting, his stillness heavier than noise. I sensed questions in the way his eyes narrowed, in the way his fingers paused on the edge of the desk. When I described the wristband and the hawk ring, something in him tightened, like a lock turning. He made someone pull up the estate's camera feeds, and I pointed at the server's path, at the barman's position, at the moment the envelope changed hands. For the first time, I wasn't a guest. I was useful, and that frightened me almost as much as the threat tonight. We mapped it until the pattern showed itself. The gray wristband meant someone issued access that didn't belong to Harrington's staff. The vial meant the plan depended on proximity, not brute force. The hawk ring meant the barman wasn't a random guest, he was supervising. And the timing meant they understood Damian's habits, including his rule about watching a drink poured. They staged a ceremonial gift to bypass his caution and used Vivian's social pressure to keep me distracted. That knowledge doesn't live in a ballroom. It lives in schedules, protocols, and someone close enough to whisper inside his circle. Damian's phone lit again, and he stared at the screen longer than before. I didn't hear the words, but I felt the weight of them in the way his shoulders settled. He ordered an audit, a full review of who had access to his calendar and who approved event security. Ms. Lorraine appeared with files, and one name surfaced more than once, someone called Graham Red, a man Damian had trusted for years. The idea of betrayal made my stomach drop. If the enemy had help inside, then Eli and I weren't just guests. We were targets now, no doubt. Damian kept me in the study after midnight, not as a guest anymore, but as a pair of eyes he trusted. The door was closed, the hallway guarded, and the only light came from a desk lamp that made the wood look almost black. I could hear the city through the glass far away, but in here everything was quiet enough to measure breathing. Eli was asleep down the hall, and that thought was the only warm thing in my chest. I promised myself to stay calm, whatever happened next. They brought Graham Red in without fanfare. He looked like a man who belonged in accounting meetings, not private rooms with silent guards. His suit was neat, his hair careful, and his hands were the kind that usually held pens, not secrets. He smiled when he entered, the automatic smile of someone used to being welcome. It lasted until Damian slid a thin folder across the desk. Graham's shoulders lifted a fraction, then settled, as if his body recognized a trap before his mind did. I watched every blink, counting. Damian didn't raise his voice. He laid out numbers and authorizations the way surgeons lay out instruments, clean and inevitable. I saw Graham's throat work as he swallowed, saw a dampness appear at his temple under the lamp. He tried to look confused, but his eyes kept darting to the folder, then to the door, then back to Damian, searching for an exit that wasn't there. In kitchens, I learned that guilt shows first in the hands. Graham's fingers kept rubbing a spot on his ring, polishing it like prayer. Eventually the story cracked. Graham's breathing turned shallow, and his eyes shone the way mine did when Eli had wheezed at 3 in the morning. He admitted, in fragments and shame, that he had been paying a private clinic for his daughter's treatment, something insurance refused to cover. The debt grew faster than his salary, and someone noticed. A stranger offered relief in exchange for access, a calendar entry, a vendor approval, a list of guest names. Graham told himself it was harmless information. His voice broke in his chest. I felt two truths at once, and they scraped against each other. Part of me wanted to hate him for putting Damian, and by extension my son, in danger. Another part of me recognized the desperation, the way a parent's fear can make you sign anything with shaking hands. Damian listened without moving, his face unreadable, but I caught a small tightening at the corner of his mouth, a flicker that said he understood the language of medical bills. The room held its breath. Even guards waited for a verdict. Damian's decision came out calm, gentle, which was the most frightening kind. He didn't order punishment in the way movies imagine. He built a structure. Graham would be taken to a secure place, more like a locked office with a medic on call. He would write down every contact, every payment route, every name tied to the Hawk ring. If he cooperated fully, Damian would fund the child's care through legitimate channels and keep her out of the blast. If he lied, the protection would vanish, and so would he. They escorted Graham out with the same quiet professionalism they used to pour coffee. No shouting, no cuffs, just a coat over his shoulders and a hand steering him to the elevator. He looked back at Damian once, stunned that he was still breathing. When the doors closed, the room felt wider, emptied of trust. Damian stayed standing, staring at the space where loyalty had been. I took a step, then stopped, unsure what comfort looked like here. I hated Graham for risking my son, yet I pictured his child. Damian finally exhaled, a sound so small I almost missed it, and I realized mercy had cost him. He had just cut a thread in his own web, and the web would sag until it was rebuilt. He sent his people into motion again, audits and calls, searching for the Hawkring broker and whoever hired him. In that efficiency I felt safer, because it meant he was fighting. Yet kindness toward a child pulled at me in ways I didn't want. It made him human, and that scared me too. Near dawn, I checked on Eli and watched him sleep, grateful for quiet that felt borrowed. Damian paused in the doorway, making sure the hall was clear before I moved, as if my safety had become part of his calculation. Tonight didn't end the hunt, it only sharpened the map. Graham's cooperation might bring answers, or it might light another fuse. Still, morning would come, and with it an uneasy lull. I sensed Damian sliding back into routine, tightening systems, holding himself together with discipline until the next night arrived. Back in my room, I washed my hands and stared at the tiny cuts, still healing under expensive soap. The contrast made me dizzy. Damian's mercy had spared Graham, but it proved the enemy knew enough to stage a poisoned toast. That knowledge didn't live at the Harrington table, it lived in Damian's calendar and security lists. Someone close had opened the door. I lay down thinking of Eli asleep nearby and Damian alone in the study. Tomorrow would bring a lull, and lulls soften your guard when you're exhausted. After Graham was escorted out, the penthouse settled into a hush that felt supervised. Lights dimmed on timers. Doors latched twice. The city glittered beyond the glass, loud with traffic I couldn't hear. I made coffee and drank it standing, because the couch looked too soft to trust. My mind kept replaying the gray wristband, the vial, the Hawk ring. Safety, I realized, wasn't a feeling here. It was a checklist, and I was learning to live inside it. Eli woke up small and brave, blinking at unfamiliar walls before he found me. I checked his breathing first, always, then guided him through his inhaler routine with slow patience so he wouldn't sense my fear. Damian had already arranged breakfast in kid-sized portions and set the inhaler beside the plate like it belonged there. No fanfare, no praise, just the quiet competence of someone who understood that a child's lungs don't wait for adults to finish talking. Damian didn't try to win Eli with charm. He won him with consistency. He noticed when Eli's shoulders climbed with anxiety and adjusted the room instead of correcting the child. A humidifier ran low and steady. The curtains were drawn to soften the winter glare. A small stool appeared in the bathroom so Eli could reach the sink without stretching. When Eli built a dinosaur tower on the rug, Damian stayed close enough to catch it if it toppled, hands hovering but never grabbing. Watching that careful restraint made my chest ache. All day, the danger hummed under the calm. Phones stayed muted. A security sweep happened without announcement, like dusting. I walked the penthouse the way I used to walk the Halston's back halls, tracking corners, mirrors, sound shifts. My old survival skill wasn't disappearing, it was being repurposed. In kitchens, invisibility kept me safe. Here, observation did. This is not mine, I told myself when the view made me dizzy. This is not mine, even when my shoulders started to unclench. Damian worked without looking frantic. Files moved across the dining table. Calls happened behind the study door. Sometimes he paused to watch Eli, not smiling, simply present, like he was memorizing normal. Those pauses scared me more than the locked elevator. They made him human. They made me want to trust him. I hated that want, because wanting is how people get trapped. And still, when Eli fell asleep after lunch, I felt relief bloom in my body like warmth returning to cold fingers. The storm arrived at dusk, rain hammering the glass and wind pushing the building into deep creeks. Eli went down early, worn out by new routines and too many whispered conversations in hallways. I stayed beside his bed a little too long, listening to his even breaths, memorizing the sound the way I used to memorize grocery prices. When I finally left his room, loneliness hit me hard, sudden and embarrassing. I had been strong for so long that strength started to feel like a private room I couldn't leave. I sat on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders and let myself admit things I never said out loud. I was tired of being the only adult. Tired of counting puffs, bills, risks. Tired of pretending fear wasn't part of motherhood. In this penthouse, for the first time, I could breathe without calculating what it cost, and that relief scared me. Damian entered quietly and sat close enough that warmth reached me, far enough that I still had choice. The contract line in my head, the 6 months, the rules, the distance, blurred under exhaustion. When my fingers reached for his, it felt less like romance and more like surrendering to rest. He didn't take, he waited, letting me decide. The moment we crossed the line wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, careful, and painfully human. I won't describe the details. I only know the storm faded into background noise, and, for a few hours, I felt safe in a way I had never allowed myself to feel. That kind of safety is beautiful. It is also dangerous in the wrong hands. Morning came too bright. Damian was already dressed, posture locked down, eyes colder than the day before. He moved through the kitchen rebuilding walls, not out of cruelty, but discipline. He checked on Eli, adjusted security, and avoided my gaze with precision that stung. The warmth from the night before felt like a secret I wasn't allowed to touch. I stood in the bathroom under harsh light and saw a different woman looking back, softer and more afraid. After Eli left the kitchen, Damian returned to the study and shut the door, leaving me with the echo of last night. I tried to tell myself it was regret, but it felt more like he was punishing himself for wanting. The distance he rebuilt was sharper than any insult. I pressed my palm to my stomach, suddenly aware of my body as a clock. I can't get used to this, I thought, and yet my fear kept counting anyway. Consequences don't ask permission. They arrive on their own schedule. My body felt subtly off, a quiet ripple under my skin that made my stomach turn. For Eli, I needed answers, not wishes. I washed my hands, stared at the sink, and knew the next step would be a test I didn't want to take. At 5:20 in the morning, the penthouse felt like a museum after closing, too clean, too quiet, full of rules that never slept. I padded into the bathroom barefoot, cold tile waking me all the way up. The building hummed through the walls, a low electrical breath. My stomach rolled, not dramatic, just wrong, like my body had slipped 1 inch out of alignment. I held the test in my hand the way I held Eli's inhaler, careful, reverent, terrified. I told myself it was just stress. I told myself not to hope. Then I watched the little window, and waited. The result appeared, 2 pink lines so solid they looked printed. My throat tightened, and my knees found the edge of the tub before I chose it. My mind did what it always does when fear arrives, it started calculating. 1 child already. 1 contract already. An active threat already circling. 6 months of public appearances, cameras, strangers, dinners where smiles hide knives. And now a second heartbeat, smaller than a seed, demanding space in a world built for leverage. I pressed my palm to my mouth to keep quiet. I could not afford this. I could not ignore it. I wrapped the test in tissue, then another layer, like I could muffle the truth. Not yet, I told myself. Not until I understood what pregnancy means to a man like Damian Crowe, a man who treats safety like an algorithm. Not until I knew whether this would make Eli a larger target. I hid the bundle in the back of my makeup bag, beneath a zipper pocket I rarely use, then washed my hands twice. Stay calm. For Eli. The mirror showed a woman with soap on her skin and panic in her eyes. I practiced looking normal today. Eli woke an hour later, hair sticking up, cheeks warm from sleep. I breathed easier when his first inhale didn't whistle. We did breakfast in the bright kitchen, and I kept my voice gentle, letting him talk about the dinosaur and the city lights. I watched him sip water between bites, checked the inhaler again, then forced myself to smile when he smiled. Every mother learns to run 2 timelines at once, the moment you're in, and the disaster you're preventing. I held both. The secret in my makeup bag felt heavier than any pan I'd ever scrubbed all day. Damian kept his distance after the night before, but his system stayed wrapped around us. A guard appeared at the hallway bend whenever I stepped out. Ms. Lorraine swapped phones for secure ones when we left a room, like we were passing through airlocks. I tried to focus on ordinary things, laundry folded into squares, Eli's homework sheet, the smell of soup simmering. But my body kept checking itself for signs, and my mind kept checking Damian for triggers. Not yet, I repeated. Outside the glass, clouds formed, and I felt like I was carrying lightning in my pocket alone. That afternoon, Ms. Lorraine escorted Eli and me to an indoor playroom in the building next door, a controlled outing meant to feel normal. We used an underground corridor with painted murals, cheerful and fake. Halfway there, a man stepped from a maintenance door holding balloons, smiling like he belonged. He angled toward Eli, too close. My stomach dropped. He wore a visitor badge, but the color strip was wrong, a dull gray like the wristband at Harrington. His eyes flicked past Eli to me, measuring, confirming. I tightened my grip and stopped. Lorraine raised her hand, time snapped shut. The balloon man froze when 2 guards appeared behind us, moving with the same quiet angle I'd seen at the mansion. One stepped between Eli and the stranger. Another guided us backward, not pulling, simply making space. I kept Eli behind my legs and watched the man's smile collapse into calculation. He showed empty palms, but his gaze darted toward the camera, then down the hall, as if waiting for a signal. Ms. Lorraine spoke into her earpiece without looking away. Damian's voice came through the comms, not loud, just final, and the building shifted into lockdown for us immediately. We didn't go back to the penthouse. We took a service elevator down to a different garage, where a second SUV waited with the engine running. Eli clutched his dinosaur and searched my face for answers. I smoothed his hair and kept my voice soft, telling him with my eyes that he was safe. My hand shook anyway. Damian met us at the door, coat on, phone in hand, gaze scanning the lot like radar. He didn't touch me. He positioned himself between us and everything else. The city blurred as we drove to another address before dawn could arrive. The safe house was quieter, smaller, and more frightening because it felt temporary. Eli fell asleep on the couch while I sat nearby, listening for footsteps. My makeup bag sat in my lap like a bomb. Not yet, I told myself, but the world was moving faster than my courage. Damian paced once, then stopped, as if containing a memory. I sensed rules behind his coldness, rules carved by loss I didn't know. The enemy had reached for my child. If Damian learned I was pregnant, would that truth protect us or shatter us? Didn't sleep. Waited, counting breaths alone. By sunrise the safe house smelled like disinfectant, instant coffee, and rain-soaked concrete. It wasn't homey the way Damian's penthouse tried to be. It was functional, the kind of place designed to disappear when needed. Cameras sat behind tinted glass. Doors clicked twice. Every window had a blind already drawn. I kept feeling watched and protected at the same time, like a museum exhibit under guard. Eli grounded me. He woke up asking for cereal and cartoons with the stubborn optimism only a 6-year-old can afford. I checked his breathing before I answered, then guided him through his inhaler routine with my hands steady even when my stomach wasn't. He leaned into me after, warm and sleepy, and for a second I almost forgot there were strangers trying to reach him. Almost. The pregnancy test felt like a stone in my pocket, even though it was hidden in my makeup bag. I could feel it anyway, the way you feel a secret in your bones. Not yet, I kept thinking. For Eli. If I tell him, my mind never finished the sentence because every ending looked sharp. I'd seen Damian go still when danger appeared, not with fear, but with calculation. Pregnancy would change the math. It would change the way enemies looked at me. It would change the way Damian looked at himself. Damian's protocols tightened after the balloon incident. Schedules shifted by the hour. Hallways were cleared before Eli and I walked through them. A driver waited outside even for a 2-minute move between rooms. I didn't complain because complaining would be a luxury, but inside I bristled. Part of me wanted to scream that I wasn't a package. Another part of me knew I had become one the moment someone tried to reach my child. Late that afternoon, I wandered into a small sitting room off the kitchen while Eli napped. The space was spare, a couch, a lamp, a shelf of books that looked untouched. On the mantel sat a framed photo turned face down, like someone couldn't stand being watched by their own past. I didn't mean to touch it. My fingers moved before my caution did, flipping it over in a quick, guilty motion. A woman looked back at me from behind glass. Young, smiling, hair blown by wind, one hand pressed over a rounded belly. Damian stood beside her, a version of him with softer eyes, his palm resting over hers like he believed the world would let him keep it. The picture wasn't staged with wealth. It was simple. It was love, and it was grief waiting with teeth. I heard Damian behind me before I turned. He didn't snatch the frame away. He just stopped, eyes on the photo, and the air in the room went quieter than the safe house already was. I braced myself for anger, for control, for the rules. Instead I felt something worse, a crack in him that made the room feel cold. He explained without drama, in the same steady tone he used to explain exits and schedules. He had been married. She had been pregnant. And she had died anyway, not from sickness, not from fate, but because someone wanted to hurt him and chose the easiest target. He didn't describe how. He didn't need to. The absence in his voice told me everything. Since then, surprises became enemies. Strangers became threats. Every room needed an exit. Every plan needed backups. Distance wasn't cruelty. Distance was how he kept breathing. My anger shifted shape. I'd been furious at his control, at the way my life got rewritten by other hands. Now I understood the engine behind it, and that understanding hurt. It made me see him as a man who had survived something unbearable by turning himself into a system. It also made my dread rise, because my secret wasn't just about me anymore. It was about his deepest wound. Not yet, I told myself again. If I tell him. I pictured his face when he'd looked at that photo. I pictured my own son asleep down the hall. I pictured two futures colliding, and I felt my throat close. That night I made a decision that tasted like steel. Leaving felt safer than staying, not because I didn't want Damian, but because wanting him made me reckless. Pregnancy made me leverage, and leverage gets people hurt. I packed quietly: Eli's inhaler, his favorite sweatshirt, a small bag of snacks, the dinosaur, my IDs, the cash in the new wallet. I didn't take much, because I didn't want anyone to notice weight missing. I wrote a note I didn't sign, not a dramatic goodbye, just a simple statement of intent. I was trying to protect my child. Before dawn I dressed Eli in soft clothes, and told him we were going for an early drive, something calm. He rubbed his eyes, and trusted me, and that trust nearly broke me. I walked us toward the garage with my heart pounding and my face neutral, repeating my mantra under my breath. For Eli. Stay calm. Keep moving. We didn't make it to the SUV. A guard stepped into view, not blocking us aggressively, just present in the exact spot I needed to pass. Another appeared behind us, closing distance without touching. The hallway camera light blinked once. I felt the trap spring, quiet and inevitable. Damian came from the stairwell a moment later, coat already on, hair still damp as if he'd been awake all night. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He looked at Eli first, then at me, then at the go bag in my hand, and the fear that crossed his face was so fast most people would miss it. He moved with strategy, not possession. He shifted Eli behind him, giving my son a shield without making him feel like a hostage. He signaled the guards to stand down, then guided us back toward the kitchen where cameras were fewer and doors were thicker. I understood in that moment that he wasn't stopping me because I belonged to him. He was stopping me because leaving would make us easy to find. His world didn't allow uncontrolled exits. I swallowed hard and nodded, pretending obedience while my chest burned. My secret pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Later, while Ms. Lorraine repacked our things with clinical efficiency for yet another relocation, she opened my makeup bag to remove liquids for travel. I watched from the doorway as her hand paused on the wrapped bundle. Tissue, then more tissue, then the unmistakable shape underneath. She froze, just for a breath, and the room seemed to hold still with her. When she lifted her eyes to mine, I knew my secret was no longer mine. Ms. Lorraine's hand froze over my makeup bag, and the room filled with a silence that had weight. The tissue bundle sat in her palm like evidence, and my skin went cold from scalp to toes. Damian stepped in from the hallway, eyes scanning the object before they touched my face. I couldn't breathe. Eli slept on the couch in the next room, dinosaur tucked under his chin, unaware that my secret had surfaced. I felt shame, then rage at myself for believing I could hide truth inside zippers. He didn't speak, he waited, and waiting was its own verdict. Later, in the kitchen, Ms. Lorraine repacked our bags as if nothing had happened, but I watched Damian's hands tighten around his phone. I understood he was choosing control over collapse. A museum fundraiser tied to the Harrington Circle was scheduled for that evening, and he intended to appear, because disappearing would tell the enemy they'd won. My stomach turned at the thought of cameras and crowds. I wanted to run, but Eli needed normal and Damian needed leverage. I nodded, pretending bravery, while the hidden test burned like a brand in my bag. For Eli, I forced myself calm. The Art Institute glowed against the lakefront, all marble steps and warm light, while valet lines formed like a parade. Inside, donors floated in tuxedos and gowns, champagne flashing under chandeliers, and every smile felt practiced for press photos. I stayed close to Damian without clinging, posture lifted the way Celeste drilled into me. Security blended into the crowd, eyes moving, hands free. I scanned badges, wristbands, routes to exits, and the patterns of servers. Eli wasn't here, but I carried him like a pulse. If I failed, the danger would find him again. Air smelled of perfume, metal, threat. A violinist began a slow piece near the stairs, and the crowd shifted toward the sound, bodies turning like one animal. That was when I saw the gray wristband, dull against a white cuff, on a server moving the wrong direction. He carried a tray of sparkling water toward Damian's side, not the bar. His fingers were steady, but his eyes kept checking the balcony above, waiting for a cue. I didn't shout. I caught the nearest guard's gaze and tilted my chin toward the band, then stepped to block the path with my own body. Damian noticed at once. The server halted, and a second later the room rearranged itself around Damian. A curtain of security appeared between him and the tray, polite smiles masking hard angles. Someone guided me toward a side corridor as the violin kept playing, louder now, like a cover. I glimpsed the gray wristband again as the server was turned gently but firmly toward a service door. No struggle, no scene, just a disappearing act. Cameras would show guests sipping and laughing, not the quiet capture of a threat. In the hallway, Damian's hand hovered near my back, steadying without claiming. My knees shook. In the SUV, the city lights smeared across tinted glass, and my pulse refused to slow. Damian sat opposite me, phone dark in his hand, expression locked. MS. Lorraine had already texted him what she found, I was sure, because secrets travel faster than elevators in his world. When we reached the safe house, he closed the door behind us and set the wrapped test on the table. He went so still I felt it in my teeth, the same stillness I'd seen when danger approached. I admitted, in a rush of breath, why I hid it: fear, leverage, Eli. He didn't punish me for the secret. He absorbed it like a blow and stayed upright, eyes fixed on a point beyond the wall. I watched his grief flicker, the echo of a woman in a photo and a child he never brought home. Then he moved, not toward possession, but toward structure. He arranged a doctor I could trust, a lawyer who would put my name on protections that couldn't be revoked in anger, and an account only I controlled. He handed me a keycard and proved, through paperwork, that I could leave any time with Eli, no questions asked. By morning, his team traced the gray wristband access back to a subcontractor hired under false credentials, and Graham's notes pointed to the broker with the hawk ring. Damian didn't celebrate. He coordinated. Phones rang behind closed doors, and people moved like chess pieces, quiet and precise. The broker vanished from public view within hours, not through spectacle, but through consequence. The immediate pressure eased, like a fist loosening, yet I knew the enemy wasn't a single man, it was a network that fed on openings. Damian tightened the system again, and I understood why he feared surprises so much. Weeks later, we moved into a quiet townhouse on a tree-lined street, close to a clinic that treated Eli's asthma like a priority. He started school with a nurse who knew his plan, and his cough stopped ruling our nights. I found a small commercial kitchen and began baking again, turning exhaustion into a business I owned. Damian didn't hover. He checked in, then showed up only when I invited him, sitting at my table with careful respect. Some nights we talked, other nights we watched Eli build dinosaur cities, safe enough to be ordinary. I kept my keycard, always. I used to think rescue meant surrender, that safety always came with strings you couldn't cut. Now I know the difference between being protected and being owned. Damian's world is still dangerous, but he learned to love without locking me up, and I learned I don't have to prove strength by suffering alone. I'm Riley, still a mom, still scared sometimes, but I have choices that can't be taken with a wristband and a vial. If this story hit you, like it, share it, and comment where you're watching from. Would you have taken the 6-month deal for your child?